Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Rozenfeld, founder of Freshwater Investments, and today I'm pleased to welcome Ekaterina Solovova. Ekaterina has over 20 years of experience in development finance and currently leads the operations and team of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in Albania, where she's been based since 2021. Under her leadership, EBRD has significantly scaled its support across key sectors of the Albanian economy. Over the course of her career, Ekaterina has held a range of senior roles at the bank, from advising to president to leading private equity investments and serving on the boards of portfolio companies. Today, we'll talk about development finance, leadership, and what it really takes to build strong competitive markets over the long term. Katya, welcome to the show.
Hi, Alex. How are you doing?
Doing
Thank
great.
you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. It's a pleasure. So where do I find you today?
Yeah, I'm in my office in Tirana. I have my Thunderbird memory behind me next to the little mini sculpture of Skanderberg, who is a national hero in Albania. And there's something you cannot see is the flag of EBRD. And above it is the picture from London. So everything that matters to me is here.
Excellent. So maybe we can start with a little overview of Albania and what is it like today to be in
Well, it's certainly an exciting place to be honest, because it's a lot of changes that are happening in the country, even in the space of the last 4.5 years that I've been here. It can be observed physically. There's new buildings are coming up, the roads are being built, tourism development, and the number of tourists that are arriving every year is increasing. But also this sort of the dynamism and spirit of the people. It's a front runner, together with Montenegro, is a front runner for the next EU accession.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite real. So, of course, it's setting in motion quite a few developments, including the reforms across the board to align with the EU legislation and with the EU acquis, what we say. But also, it gives a lot of excitement and hope to the people, because they're joining. They have a prospect of joining such a large union, an important market, common market for obviously goods, labor, business. So it's good time to be here.
Excellent. Good. Well, we'll come back to Albania and its economy and business environment in a little bit. But let's start with your beginnings, with your childhood. If you can tell us, where did you grow up? Maybe a little bit about your family, your parents.
Yeah, I grew up in a wonderful city of Samara. It's on the Volga River in Russia, and it has quite interesting history because until World War II, it perhaps wasn't so remarkable, but during World War II, it became a backup capital of the country, and as a result, lots of important industry have been relocated to the region. The embassies relocated. There was a big bunker built for Stalin, 5 stories high. So basically, kind of gave that impetus of a huge industrial complex and all the academia that has surrounded the development of aerospace industry in particular, and later automotive. And that attracted my parents, who came to study in what will later become Samara Aerospace University. And so my parents, they're skiers, but they're also aircraft engineers. So that combination kind of shaped my whole upbringing, because despite having 11 universities in the region, in the minds of my parents and my family, there was only one worth considering ever, and it was the Samara Aerospace University, where they have both studied and have worked the entire career. And my sister, who is 6 years older, she also graduated from that university in the computer science department. So I was duly expected to follow the familiar pattern, familiar footsteps. And that's why I was enrolled into the Aerospace Lyceum, which was the feeder high school for that university. And it was teaching, I was trying to remember, but I'm guessing at least 10 hours of calculus and 10 hours of theoretical physics per week to those prodigy children who enrolled, predominantly boys. I was one of the 3 girls in the class. And so that was my fate. But I sort of was a little bit of that black sheep in the family. Or maybe, I don't know, they kind of took a break on me. at the time. So I wasn't that good actually with calculus and physics, and I had zero interest in engineering. But despite that fact, that high school was a game changer for me because, among other things, they also introduced me to the UN, United Nations Association organization, which opened the window to the world through participation in what's called UN model. It's essentially simulation of United Nations.
And it was in the 90s?
Yeah, it was
early 90s, right?
Yeah, so it was this organized by a visionary person. In my view, she was a visionary. And so we were the first regional team who was sent by Russia to The Hague in the Netherlands to participate in Model UN. And we were sort of met with disbelief by the students of MGIMO because that kind of engagement was more or less exclusive to the students of the prestigious, diplomatic school in Russia.
And for people who don't know,
that's
this
where,
is the
that's where Mr. Lavrov, I believe, still teaches.
Yeah.
So everyone heard of Lavrov. So anyhow, so we were this strange kids from the region. I remember I was representing Algeria in the General Assembly, and that kind of was the first introduction into the international organizations, to the multilateral institutions, to the whole globalization, if you will, that kind of influenced a lot, I think, in my subsequent choices in life and interests. And I even went on to set up my own NGO, which was focusing on youth exchanges between different countries. And to my huge surprise, that NGO has survived for quite a few years, even after I left Russia, even with the same name. So I didn't know that, but something had lived on. And so anyways, by the time I entered university, I was already pretty active in sort of various extracurricular activities, but my focus was not so much on technical sciences, as I said. Business was the new engineering in the post-Soviet space. Everyone was interested in business. And so we, by definition, I said, if I were to go to the aerospace university, it will be to the business administration department, which was fairly new. And so another fateful event, I think, that I kind of see as a defining moment happened in August 1998. And that was not the sovereign debt crisis of Russia, but the fact that I was introduced to the newly opened American Business Center. And that was a State Department program in Samara. Yeah, so this was the time in the 90s when, the U.S. State Department, the USAID, various development programs were moving into these countries with the view of, essentially establishing business links, trade links, all sorts of exchanges. So that was the idea behind the project, to create a center where the businesses from the United States could obtain information about markets in the regions beyond Moscow and St. Petersburg, in those industrial regions where they could perhaps form some ties, trade links. And so that was the idea. And because I already had decent English, but I was not in the foreign language major like most people who spoke decent English. I was actually hired as a business research assistant. And in 1 year, I have applied and won a contract to manage my own sort of regional program funded by U.S. Department of Commerce, covering about 12, 13 regions in the Volga area, again, creating trade links with, opening the markets for the US companies or for Russian companies who wanted to buy US products. To be honest, all of it was fairly futile in 1999, 2000, when, of course, it was post devaluation era. Nobody was thinking of importing US products. It was absolutely off limits. Yeah, it was just theoretical. But it was very interesting. And of course, at the age of 21, I was probably the youngest contractor of that kind of U.S. Department of Commerce programs. And my job was to actually interact with the CEOs of large companies and regional governments and try to sort of create links and introduce them to the U.S. counterparts. So it was an interesting time, interesting job. And
how did this... I assume those guys, old school CEOs and managers, looking at this 21-year-old young lady speaking English and representing US government, what was that dynamic like?
Yeah, you got exactly the right question, because at that time, of course, they were all from the old generation. And often it was a clear clash of generations, but I quickly learned that I cannot drink that much water. And, it was difficult. But they were also very curious, and that opens the door. Right? So you kind of
Mm-hmm.
go through this first initial, who are you, what are you going to teach us? And then the curiosity takes over, and you just like it's a natural skill that you develop.
Mm-hmm.
It was a learning experience, and it was quite a lot of responsibility. And so when you have responsibility, you sort of also learn how to grow up, and you conduct yourself
Right.
accordingly. So that, and those times, frankly, it was not unusual. You had a lot of young people in quite advanced positions because, again, it was a transition time, right? So
Yeah.
the
Even
old
the
sort of
prime minister, even prime minister of Russia was like 30-year-old guy from
yeah.
Boris Nemtsov.
Yeah, he was the governor of the Nizhny Novgorod region at the time. So, and yeah, and he was no, he was probably in the federal government at the time. So seeing young people in high positions
Mm-hmm.
was not unusual, particularly given that the language skills were very rare. And then if people who spoke English, they were usually from the young generation. So I think that was the sign of the time. But okay, it
Yeah.
takes initiative and a bit of that risk taken out of your comfort zone. And I was still in university. I was in my fourth, fifth years of
Mm-hmm.
university, full-time student actually. So that was interesting. I was managing two people in an office, and I was traveling by myself to Astrakhan and Saratov and Volgograd and all of that, and even to first time in the US, I went to see the automotive because Volga region was all about automotive industry at the time. We went to see potential suppliers in Ohio. So my first introduction to the US was actually, via Washington, D.C., but then Cleveland, Ohio, and some other, and Chicago. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Toledo was very interesting. That
In
was,
what regard?
I think I just never. It was the first time I saw such huge cars. And I think in general it was just first introduction to America, 1999, and these kind of big spaces. Okay, not new to me from Russia, but it was more manicured, it was more developed, and they were looking at us as well because we had representatives like me from different parts of Russia, and they were sort of like also looking at us like aliens, and we were looking at them,
Big open eyes.
with big open eyes,
Yeah.
and they're like, so what can we sell to your regions? So that was kind of those. Yeah, no, it was all fun, and so that sort of positioned me pretty well for thinking, okay, what's next? How do I want to take it
Mm-hmm.
further? And I never really wanted to go to Moscow, for instance, because I was already pretty advanced in what I was doing in terms of responsibility, and I thought, okay, what's the next step forward? And MBA was sort of a
One of
fairly
the avenues. Yeah.
avenue. Yeah, so that has been also suggested by a couple of mentors at the time. And you already know that a lot of kids in those days from that region were Muskie scholars.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I applied for the Muskie scholarship, and of course they were always naysayers.
Well, we should probably explain to our
Edmund
listeners
Muskie
what's a
was a
Muskie scholarship.
congressman. Correct. So it was a congressman in the U.S. Who had this sort of sponsored the initiative early on I believe in the early 90s, to sort of provide financial assistance for the graduates from the former Soviet Union, from former sort of socialist bloc countries, to obtain graduate degrees in the United States. And the idea was that these people is the new generation of leaders who will bring out, American values and education, and will be the link between the two countries, not the respective countries, right? So, and and that was actually working. For instance, the first president after Shevardnadze in Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili, was actually a Muskie scholar
Muskie.
who came into Georgia, became president, kind of like a new change of the fresh blood, because Shevardnadze was a former Politburo as well, right? So a lot of these kids who came back became essentially, business leaders, entrepreneurs. Some joined government administration with the skills. And so it was graduate degrees in various fields, so public administration, business. What else? Primarily these two, to be honest. Anyhow,
Hmm.
so it was very competitive. I think it was like 600 applications for each. And of course, I was told MBA, forget it, just go for public administration, something simple. It's like, no, I want MBA. So I went through the process. You need to you go get the exams, GMAT and TOEFL, and then the point is that you don't get to choose the school chooses you.
Hmm.
And then, so when I got sort of the scholarship, Thunderbird, and then people were like, oh,
So,
maybe think about it. Maybe you want Chicago Business School. Maybe it's better to pay. And I'm like, listen, to all the naysayers, this is great. Who is going to say no to the scholarship? And
so
Thunderbird sounded the best.
yeah. So sorry to interrupt, but it's the first story on the podcast when Thunderbird picked the person, not the person picked Thunderbird,
Yeah,
which is
it was great because I was like, I got a call in August 2001. They told me you got this scholarship and you're going to Thunderbird. And I'm like, what is Thunderbird? Oh, let me look it up. Just it's and I think I was the first one from my hometown to actually win the MBA Maski scholarship. So it just sounded perfect, and within few weeks I was on the plane to Arizona, August 2001. It's just the whole setup was perfect for me. Arizona, felt so different from where I came from that it was just perfect because I really wanted something completely different, the campus, of course, and all that. So that's how I ended up there. And so the
and
first couple of months were quite tough. Yeah. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
No. So I was just, this adjustment period. And of course, 9/11 happened the first week of classes. I remember
Hmm.
this. It was just a huge shock. Things have changed. But coming back to sort of the first experiences, I came in with the idea that I will do marketing. So just because in my university, I was sort of leaning towards marketing, maybe some kind of HR, psychology, so kind of like business development. So that's where I thought my field would be. Except when I got to Thunderbird, I realized I was just pretty good at accounting and finance.
Hmm.
But I could not compete with my American friends in classes where you had to talk a lot. When we came to finance and accounting, that's where I felt the best. So
That
of
was
course
easy for you.
of course the language wasn't as good at the time, right? So, and plus the whole, method of education where you're not used to be using, your verbal abilities as much, whereas
Yeah,
the
you graded on
analytical,
participation in the class.
right? So it was great.
Yeah, I struggle with that too.
So naturally, I was like, "Oh, I'm beating everyone at the finance because even though I was probably not as good as my prodigy peers at Aerospace Lyceum, I was still very good at math."
Hmm.
So anyway, I'm making it a little bit lighthearted, but it was true. At first, it was difficult. That's how and then I started learning a little more, and I was like, "Oh, what do I want to do? Management consulting. I don't want to be a CFO. I don't want to be management consulting, but I want to be in finance
Hmm.
with some elements of consulting. So it's investment banking. And I started learning how do you get into these fields. And the key event was I don't know if you had it, but we had this
Yeah, we
winterim
had
in Wall
winters. Yep.
Street. It was supposed to be. But because of 9/11, that first year, winterim was moved to London. And so I approached the organizing professor and I said, I want to go to your winterim. And he's like, who are you? How many trimesters you were here? One?
Hmm.
No, this is for for the ones who are graduating. You don't know anything yet. You just like, no. I said, listen, I want to go. What should I do? He's like, well, I don't know. Like, make sure you take every single finance course you can. And maybe if we have a spare place, I'll enroll you. And by the
Hmm.
way, I think the Citigroup was given some scholarships for tickets in case you want. So I got every single finance course I could take in the first trimester. And I also went to Citigroup. I applied for the scholarship and I got some financial assistance for the ticket. So I joined that winterim in London with the kids who were
Understand.
graduating
Yeah.
class, and it was led by this professor called Mark Griffiths. And Mark Griffiths, he was professor of financial engineering, and I don't think he ever worked on Wall Street, but he just made sure he scared us all. So he was glorifying the horrors of investment banking to us, how you would be, used like slaves, not sleep,
Work 80
and
hours a week.
just work this and work that. He would bring some pale graduates to us to speak about how they would sleep in the office, and then in the morning the boss would write a check and go get yourself a suit. We're
Hmm.
seeing a client in 2 hours, and everyone was sitting with like their mouth open. And I was thinking, why are they excited by this? This is not exciting. This is glorified torture, because sleep deprivation is torture. So I really understood at that time that no, investment banking is not for me. And certainly I'm not impressed. I'm really not impressed. But I still was searching. So eventually I came up to private equity. And that's where I was like, listen, they combine all the intellectual curiosity of a management consulting, but they also control the decisions because
Yeah.
they invest, they implement it. So that would just looked perfect. And it looked very smart. Without that, you still work a lot, but
Yeah.
they don't talk
Without
about
being a
how they
slave.
don't sleep, right? So so that professor was like, no, you are a closed-minded person. You cannot get to private equity unless you work 5 years in, investment banking. So, and I said, no, I actually like to try. During that London trip, which was very interesting and fateful, in fact, because I ended up in London. Eventually, I met a Thunderbird alumni at EBRD,
Hmm.
who was head of the TMT team, Izat Guni. And I just approached him and said, listen, I want to work in private equity. What can I do? How can I get there? And he's like, well, you need to get an internship. I said, yes, that's why I'm asking you. So I want
Hmm.
internship at private equity funds. How can I get there? Do you have any contacts? Would you? I mean, of course, I didn't speak like this, but okay,
Yeah.
it was the gist of it was like this. And he said, so what? How did you even get here? So I told him a little bit about scholarship, and I said, I think I also have a scholarship for the summer. So I actually don't need to get paid. And he's like, that's how you get there. You don't need to be paid. So that's what you're going to use to get ahead of all those Whartons and Columbia people who
Hmm.
will be knocking the same doors. And by the way, I'll introduce to you to every private equity fund manager I know. And he knew quite a few because EBRD was financing, providing leverage and co-investing with many of them in emerging markets. And so he did what the alumni do. He introduced with, and and the rest was up to me.
That's
And so on
great.
the way back through New York, I met a few of them, and I landed an internship at the Soros Private Equity Funds Management. They had this newly set up fund for Southeast Europe, which included, I think, 50 million of Soros's own funds and 150 of concessional loan from U.S. Overseas Private Investment Corporation. So it was a
Hmm.
leveraged fund to invest in these newly emerging countries in the Southeast Europe, which included, by the way, Albania and Serbia and that time former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, but there was no Montenegro or Kosovo yet, actually, at those times. It also included Turkey and Bulgaria. And so
Hmm.
that was a pretty wild West areas still for the mainstream private equity. This was summer 2002, and the fund was managed literally by these two guys in New York. One of them was called Ron Drake, and another one is Dave Matheson. Both quite legendary and had different styles, but amazing people. And that was an eye-opening experience for me. The learning curve was extremely steep.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking back, I was like, after 2 years, two trimesters of Thunderbird, I still couldn't necessarily have the skills, that would be required, to build, I don't know,
Yeah.
equity valuation model. So I was learning everything on the job, and you can't put a price on this kind of exposure. I was able to acquire. I had 2 summers with them, and I was watching the history being made. To be honest, because some of these first investments they've become regional champions that I have, you know, interacted later in my
Hmm.
career. they've grown from like one person literally with an idea into, billion corporations.
And they were investing in private businesses.
Yes. They were invested. It was a private equity fund, and they were backing entrepreneurs in these countries, and they were traveling into these regions. I also traveled at least to one due diligence trip. So it was interesting. And of course, one of the highlights was meeting George Soros himself.
Oh, wow.
Because for me, coming from where I'm from, he was a big presence, and it was absolutely a huge honor to be introduced to him. I was also a recipient of the support by Open Society Foundation in my sort of youth exchange programs, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan. So that was amazing, and that gave me that important first experience. I couldn't stay in the US because the conditions of the programs were that we would have to leave. And so at the end of my program, sort of I was thinking where I go. So and
Mm-hmm.
at that time the obvious trajectory would be to come back to Russia, where of course in 2003 already there was quite a lot going on because of the rising sort of consumer businesses, the big market, the import substitution process, where the production was localized in the country for pretty much all consumer goods. That was actually a booming starting time for the private equity, because when you want to be at the beginning of to catch the
Yeah.
growing curve. I met this guy at Thunderbird, so we were in a relationship, and I thought, okay, how far is he prepared to follow me? He followed me to the East Coast, but will he go all the way to Russia? Probably not, and it wouldn't be fair to expect. So there was a bit of that mixture of professional and personal, as
Personal.
always, driving the decisions and choices. And so I ended up in London, and I ended up in Izzet Guni's team, that Thunderbird alumni
Mm-hmm.
who introduced
Who
me
you met
to
initially, yeah.
the Soros funds. Yes, and had a job for an analyst. I applied, got through the interviews, and it was great. We came to London in 2004. I was with that team, and it was the coolest team in the bank. My colleagues will not agree, of course, colleagues from other teams. But it was, I mean, if you wanted to work in the equity or private equity, that was the team who were actually making some profitable equity investments, because they were investing in the emerging telcos in the countries where these services never existed. If you think about
Before.
Russia at the time being 150 million market and mobile penetration at 20%,
Mm-hmm.
best in 2005, if you invest in equity of a mobile operator or an equity like instrument, you will do 2-3x
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, so
Because
maybe it's a good segue for my question about the EBRD in general. If you can talk about the bank's kind of mission and why it was
yeah,
created and what it does today. So just to give our listeners an idea.
yeah. So it's a multilateral development finance institution, multilateral bank. It's probably one of the youngest such institution, because of course the World Bank was set up in the 50s. It was created in 1991 to help the newly sort of emerging market economies in these post-socialist, sort of Soviet era Eastern Europe bloc. That's the original geography, for these economies to transition to market economies.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a very specific mandate. It was unlike the World Bank, for instance, which is the main mandate originally was to alleviate poverty. Here it was very specifically to transition from these centrally planned economies to the market economies. That would be Eastern Europe, Czech Republic, Slovak Republic, Poland, Baltic countries, Hungary, Bulgaria, so all of that,
Mm-hmm.
and the former Soviet Union. So that was the most at the origins. In our boardroom, we have, of course, the pieces of Berlin Wall as a symbol of, that change. And the founding nations were sort of the Western European economies: France, Germany, UK, US, of course, Japan. And then eventually the shareholding base has expanded. Today we have 79 shareholders, and we also expanded
Is it
geographies.
private or public shareholders?
These are governments, sorry. So it's
All governments.
intergovernment. Yeah, it's all governments plus the European Union and EIBs. So we have if I'm not mistaken, because we keep adding members, so 77 member states plus 2 intergovernment organizations are our shareholders. So that's not dissimilar with the mentioned earlier World Bank, who have wider shareholding base, but the principles are the same. So we're owned by the government. The initial capital was put together by the government, but the bank is self-financing itself in the market. So we have this shareholder support, of course, but day to day, our lending operations, and we are issuing bonds. We're AAA rated institution. And we go out to the market. We issue bonds. On our liability side, on the asset side, we invest. We primarily finance with debt and debt-like instruments. We participate in capital issuances of companies in our countries of operations, but we also have equity mandates, so we can finance with anything on the spectrum from senior debt to straight equity and everything in between. But also we have a fund of funds operations. So it's a proper sort of proper investment with full range of instruments or vehicle. We have multiple teams. We are organized by sectors, but also by countries. And today we operate across multiple regions. So our geography has really expanded. So we have now Middle Eastern countries, North African countries, Morocco, for instance, Egypt, Tunisia, Iraq since last year, Jordan. We have expanded to Sub-Saharan Africa last year as well. But we still operate in our core traditional region of Eastern Europe. We do no longer invest in Russia and Belarus since
the war started.
We stopped new investments in Russia in 2014, and we exited fully in February 2022. So the core mission has also expanded beyond just transition to market economy, because as countries develop, the definition of what we call sustainable market economy also expands. So we are aiming to support development of green, resilient, competitive, well-governed, and inclusive economies, market economies, open economies still. So, and we operate in countries with a sort of democratic construct. So open economies. So that's in a nutshell.
That's a great overview. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So the skills are the same as in finance, plus you also have a mission and development mission.
Katya, thank you for that overview of EBRD and its mission in Europe and beyond. Now let's touch base on your current role at EBRD in Albania as the head of country for EBRD. And maybe we can start with Albania's history and how it shapes the current development of the country.
Yeah, I think it's actually a good start, and it's a very, very relevant question. Thank you for asking, because Albania has a somewhat special history, unlike other Western Balkans countries, because all of the Western Balkans countries except Albania used to be part of what was called Yugoslavia, but Albania was not part of it. Albania charted its own course after World War II. I'm not going to go all the way, sort of 500 years ago. Was Ottoman Empire. Albania was part of it, just like other countries in the Western Balkans. But since the independence that Albania has obtained in 1912, the most perhaps recent past is somewhat different and striking and perhaps dramatic. After World War II, the communist regime led by Enver Hoxha was established, and sort of Albania has progressively became more and more isolated. First, they were, of course, aligned with the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc. And actually, quite a few Albanian men primarily were sent to study in the Soviet Union. Some of them came back married to Russian ladies, actually, and it's a kind of a side story, perhaps interesting to me due to my origins as well. It was a sort of a side story for overall, because there is still a community or a number of families who have Russian connection. But after Stalin's death, or with Khrushchev sort of becoming more denouncing the cult of personality of Stalin and trying to slightly liberalize the situation in Soviet Union. Enver Hoxha essentially, it was not in line with Enver Hoxha's plans, and they have eventually severed the diplomatic relations with Soviet Union and aligned with China, and eventually also progressively severed relations with China. By 1980s, the country was completely isolated, was sort of very economically isolated as well, so very poor. So when I talk to my friends here of the same age who grew up in the 80s and 90s, let's say, okay, until 1990 regime was in place, and we compare our experiences just on a very mundane kind of matters, just, okay, what kind of conditions were here and there, even though I also remember not having enough food in the 80s, not enough certain foods, but never being hungry really. Just not having access to, let's say, lots of meat or chocolate, I don't know, toilet paper. And, we did have severe shortages, particularly in the regions. Here, people actually literally did not have enough to eat. So it was quite brutal. It was quite repressive, considering also the geographic position of Albania that was surrounded. And it's not a big country. You have Greece in the south, you have Montenegro, which was Yugoslavia, sort of on the 2/3 of the country, and the borders. Sometimes if you sit in the south of Albania, you see Corfu Island so close, you can swim there. And I can imagine how it was for the people who lived there. They could see Greece from their balconies or from the coast. And there are stories of people trying to cross and being shot, stories of dramatic escapes. Up until 1991, people were shot at the border. So it definitely shaped the current generation a lot. It was quite a depriving time. People were not allowed to own vehicles. So if in Soviet Union we had to wait for 10 years in line, like this famous wait lists, but still we had people, my friends had cars, my family never, but it was not something out of ordinary. Here, no one was allowed unless you were party official and had a drive or military. Literally, basic amenities were not available to people up until 1991 when the regime collapsed. And brutal suppression as well. So of any dissent. So my colleagues, for instance, some of them were interned as kids from, let's say, Tirana or another large city. For whatever reason, their parents fell out of favor or had bad biography, and they were interned into very rural areas. And my friends, my colleagues who were maybe 8, 10 years old, kids, remember being taken out of their schools and sent to another completely different location, a remote location where they didn't know anyone and had to go to school there. And by the way, all of them in the end, of course, somehow still remarkably obtained amazing education abroad or here. And, they're working with us today at EBRD. So, but there is a trauma. I think there is definitely trauma, but also amazing resilience. So this combination, right?
Yeah, that's
So I think, sorry, the question was, how did this affect?
how does it shape the current development of the country?
Yeah. So because they were so closed off and yet so they were absolutely isolated, but they were so close at the same time. They have this amazing zeal for learning about other countries, experience other cultures and countries, to be out there, bring something here that then, from other countries. Amazingly, most of Albanians speak Italian just because they were able to catch the waves, radio or TV waves from, again, across the Adriatic. And they learned the language by watching the Italian movies and cartoons. I mean, it's amazing how, and they speak Italian not just a little bit, they speak it like it's their adopted language that they love. And then, of course, on top of this, multiple other languages, so this amazing propensity of learning language, being receptive to everything that's new and from outside, because I think it's this closeness, we get proximity. And of course, following the regime collapse, there was a massive wave of immigration to Italy, to Greece, to the United States that, of course, impacted some of the situation, demographic situation. The country continues to impact, but people also returning. And my team, most people studied and lived abroad and came back. So I think that what it shapes the main point, perhaps, if I were to single out, the country has this firm identity that we are part of Europe, part of big world, part of Europe. They're part of NATO, by the way, also. So we're like, because we were so deprived of being part of all of this, there's no doubt, irrespective of political parties or preferences or views, there's absolutely no doubt about where they want to go, and that of course moves the countries firmly towards the EU. It was also obvious for them to join NATO at some point. So that's probably one thing to distinguish. The other thing I already mentioned, that resilience, this openness for sort of everything that comes from outside, as well as being quite proud about being Albanian, actually. And also the other thing is interesting. Communist regime has contributed perhaps to, but I think it began way before that. They're extremely tolerant to different denominations of religion. Here within where I am, I have the Orthodox cathedral, I have the Catholic cathedral, I have a big mosque, families, interfaith, marriage. So it's a very tolerant country, so people feel very comfortable. And I think their identity is first and foremost shaped by I'm Albanian before I'm a Muslim or I'm a Orthodox or anything else of that sort.
And it's actually a good segue to my next question. So for example, for international investors coming to Albania for the first time, like what cultural nuances do they need to pay attention to? And you just mentioned that it's kind of melting pot of cultures and religion.
Yeah.
Any other cultural nuances that they need to pay attention to?
Yeah, I'm still figuring it out. I
And
think
how long you've been in Albania?
4.5 years. You
Four and a
think,
half years.
well, I'm figuring out that the there's levels and levels and levels. Of course, we're talking perhaps a little more superficial understanding, like cultural sensitivity, rather than really understanding what's going on, right? That it will take years, honestly. Look, I think first of all, very pleasant and hospitable culture. So hospitality is important, and it's important to respect the hospitality. The famous scene is trying to pay for the bill as a guest. Just forget it. At the restaurant, if you are having a meal, if you want to pay for the meal, you have to do it by saying, I'm just gonna pop into the bathroom, and then you pay the bill. You will never be allowed to do that. All that American nonsense, just forget it
Doesn't
here.
work.
Yeah, and don't fight it, and don't judge it either. So it's important, but it's important to keep tabs, because next time you need to pay. So that's also important. So it's a bit of that. People need to know each other personally first. You have to really establish the trust. You cannot be transactional into the face of the people, really. And again, it is not easy for Anglo-Saxon way of doing business. The best framework I think I've seen, perhaps even a Thunderbird, that says there are low context cultures which are more transactional. So these are Nordics, Anglo-Saxon, and there are high context cultures where it's more about personal. So Albania is a high context culture, in my view, not just my view. So that's important to remember. Being very polite is very important, actually, even though if you drive here, you feel people are very impolite, because there's, people stop in the middle of the roundabout or at the exit of the they may stop and say hello to a friend on the highway. And if you come with your norms and expectations from, let's say, a large European city, like for instance London, or from Boston, or wherever in the US, and you start driving here, you will think people are inconsiderate and impolite. So it took me, or if you're going on the escalator in a shopping mall, people will stand in your way. They just don't, in London, it's you stand on the right, you walk on the left. It's a rule. If you are not doing this, you're considered impolite. So at first I was very reacting to this. And then I said, this is wrong. I need to understand why they're doing it. And once you understand why things happen the way they happen, you completely look at it differently. I mentioned that didn't have cars before. Up until 1991, people did not drive cars. So first of all, the whole driving experience is new. And until recently, they didn't have major roads. They were all small roads. And also people lived in smaller towns, small villages where they all know each other. So it's only natural for them to stop and talk, even if they are in cars now. So it used to be that they would walk and talk. Now they're all in cars and they still, respect and, friends. So in escalators experience is only been so far in big shopping malls, not in the subway, because not in the transport context. So for them, it's a relaxing day. For me, it's a running to the train. So why should they be walking the escalators? So you have to constantly look at it through the lens of the local situation and not through the lens of your own experience. So that's how you do it, and then life suddenly becomes easier. And so that's my advice for anyone who comes here. Just observe, learn, try to understand why this is done this way and not the way you are used to it.
Let's talk a little bit about EBRD's mission in Albania. Like how do you select projects to invest in? What's your criteria overall? Maybe you can talk about the volume of investments that you've done so far.
Yeah. Well, so we have a country strategy in every country we operate, which genuinely tailored to the country's priorities, but most of the gist, the sort of the core strategy is very much aligned with the strategy of EBRD globally. So, and the mandate, right? So I mentioned it before that the mandate is usually to build the sustainable market economy, sustainable, inclusive, green, well-governed, competitive. So all these parameters that we are looking in the economy. And so every 5 years, we have these strategic priorities, which don't change dramatically year after, from one strategic period to another. So it's almost always focusing on green transition, so green economy transition. It's focusing on economic governance. And this current strategic period is also human capital development, which basically encompasses the notion of inclusive economy, right? So in Albania, we are sort of guided by this large strategic framework, but specifically given the country's current priorities on the accession to the EU. So we are aligned with those priorities. And for instance, the private sector competitiveness, which is always our strategic priority in Albania, is focused on preparing the private sector companies here for the entrance to the EU single market, for instance. The green economy priorities in Albania are expressed in the fact that Albania actually producing 100% of its energy from green sources, and it's hydro production. But since the climate patterns are changing, also the energy demands are growing, the hydro is not enough. So Albania had to import about 25 to 30% of its consumption from other countries, and they're not always produced with green sources. So one of our strategic priorities is diversification of renewable energy sources, and that's into solar and wind. And we've been working with the government on this, and we're supporting projects in that respect. So connectivity is also quite important on the agenda. That's basically infrastructure, transport infrastructure, mainly railways and roads, to connect Albania with its neighboring countries, with the EU eventually, but also within the countries, because connectivity is very important for stimulation of the economic activity. So these are like perhaps the pillars: economic governance. We support Investment Council in Albania as one of our policy initiatives. As one example of how we achieve this, so we work with state-owned enterprises on making them more well-governed, more sustainable. So that's more or less the gist. And then each project that we finance has to somehow fit into that strategy. And all of them do, of course. And we provide impact through financing and technical assistance.
Got it. I assume you gotta be a very busy person. What's a day in your life looks like in the day in life of head of Albania for EBRD?
Yeah, let me open my calendar for tomorrow, just as an example. Okay, so let's me combine 2 days into one. So that is sometimes it's like that. So let's say I could be in the event in the morning that's, for instance, either someone else's event where I'm invited to speak about EBRD or speak on a specific topic, or it could be our event when we, for instance, this week on Tuesday, we have presented our annual transition report. It's a publication it's a research that our economists compile every year on a specific topic. So we had a presentation of that report to our stakeholders. That would be clients, partner banks, partners, government. Then I will proceed to catch up coffee with let's say co-investment partner, another international finance institution. Then I have lunch with the CEO of our largest corporate client. Then I will have some internal meetings, perhaps with the, with my team to catch up on the pipeline or if there is an issue. So I often get involved into operational details, of course, of a project, meetings with client, negotiating agreements or with communication with internal units. And in about 1 hour, I will go to an event by a Chamber of Commerce, Greek Chamber of Commerce on this occasion, where I will probably catch up with a few clients and perhaps international partners as well. So it's really a mix of, so it's always business development, responding to meeting requests by, various stakeholders. It's project management, and it's people management as well. So it's a very fluid mix of external and internal engagements with essentially various stakeholders. In the end, we always have an eye on the ball because we do have quite clear priorities and we have very clear plan on how much sort of what we want to achieve in every year. We set up like yesterday we had the business planning session with my team, and we discussed what we think the demand for financing will be and what projects we'll already have going, what may be coming up. So we have a plan of what we need to achieve this year. We often exceed these plans. So it's quite busy.
Yeah, it sounds very busy. Well, thank you for that overview. And I think it's time to wrap up our conversation. But before we do that, I have a few short questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
What advice, Katya, would you give to a 20-year-old self having all that experience you have right now? And yes.
Yeah, so I think when you are young and you are just starting out your career, you sort of need to build the equity. And so you need to reach for opportunities to gain experience. Sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it's tough, but you just have to put some of that time and really build, because every step, every experience somehow leads
The stepping
one
stone.
to another. Yeah. But what I've learned over the course of my career and life, and I've had a number of different pivots. I have worked in private equity, I worked at EBRD. At the beginning of my career, I left EBRD. I went to private equity in London and distressed debt investing in a hedge fund. So I was out of EBRD for 7 years, out in what I was saying to myself, real world at the time. But I came back, and I came back very consciously, because what you need to know, I think, you have to know what your values are and what you really get driven by. And my lesson was that money, for instance, is not a sustainable driver. So you are driven by your values, and it's important that what you do is in line with your values, what you really truly believe in. And when that happens, no matter how hard things are, and in my daily job here, I have quite a lot of difficult situations, really tricky conversations, high exposure to government officials, to private sector, to international community, or to local. So you have to constantly stretch yourself in different directions and find a language to speak to everyone and achieve your results. But if you know why you're doing it, you can persevere. The problem is when you do something that you don't believe in for a long time. So the lesson is you have to know when you leave, when it's not right. And that's when you should not be afraid to pivot and change and and take risk and just kind of make a move. So that's probably the advice to my children, because I kind of did that all.
That's an amazing advice. Well, thank you.
Yeah, but there was this one time when I got a call from a friend in Utah or Arizona. I was just graduating from Thunderbird, and I had my internship, second year internship at Soros lined up. And I got a call from this friend, and he said, "Listen, I'm a guide in the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River, on a raft. I have a free spot, and it's not taken. You should come. There's a 10-year wait list for this trip, and somebody just canceled. This is once in a lifetime opportunity. You should come." I'm like, "I'm going to New York. I have a career to build. Are you crazy?" And on the other side, he's like, "No, you are crazy. This is something you cannot miss." And so I still think to this day, should I have taken that trip? Am I crazy that I haven't? Because I have not been to Grand Canyon since then. And I don't know if I will be. And sometimes there's certain things you just need to do in life. And so if you can, just do these things when you are young, really, really do it. Because you will always get the job, the next job. You will always get whatever. But, get your experiences also that are like that. Trip in Colorado River. I still don't know whether it was the right choice.
It's still plenty of time to go back to Grand Canyon.
If there is a 10-year wait list, I better get on it now. Yes, exactly. By the time I retire, I'll do it.
Okay, and so I keep wondering. You mentioned a Thunderbird guide that followed you to London, if I'm not mistaken.
In 2004.
How did that story
develop?
Developed, yes, that's the right word.
So he followed me to London via Madrid, but okay, close enough. He's my husband, actually. We've been
Thunderbird
together.
Couple.
Yes, Arthur Holcomb. And we started dating on a graduation night in 2003 in May. And we are together since. It's going to be 23 years. And we have two beautiful daughters. And I always say, first of all, it's never 5 minutes into conversation that I will not mention him, no matter what the conversation is. And I always say I've changed probably, 10 jobs in my life, but I've always been with Arthur. So yeah, we're a Thunder couple. And
Congrats.
He's here with me in Albania, yeah.
That's amazing story. So maybe you can share Tom's thoughts with and have a message to our Thunderbird community, to alumni, maybe students.
Well, this podcast actually made me realize that I am probably not the most model alumni. I haven't really been in touch enough. I still have friends, of course. First of all, I have a Thunderbird at home. I'm still keeping in touch with a couple of closest friends. And in fact, one of my friends at work at EBRD is a Thunderbird. We mentioned that person at the beginning in our chat. I think it's really considering how much actually the school has, what role it really played in my life. And many people have this kind of stories. And even how, frankly, my career was given a good start by a Thunderbird alumni who never knew me. I haven't known him. There was nothing, it was the only connection was the school. It's really a Thunderbird mystique, and I think it's up to us to continue it. So I think what you are doing is inspiring me as well, and maybe should inspire others. Let's stay together and let's continue the mystique, and our Thunder kids should also perhaps have their own club or continue the second, third generation of Thunderbirds.
Yeah, no, that's a great message. Thank you. And my last question: what's your next dream travel destination?
It's, I was recently in Vietnam and it was fascinating. But my real long-term dream has been Galapagos Islands, and I think I really need to get around and plan that. So I would say Galapagos Islands.
So that's great. All right, Katya, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I learned so much about Albania, its history, EBRD, your role, your life, your journey. Congratulations on your success.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Alex, for your time as well. And thanks a lot for your attention.
Right? Take care.
Take care.